Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Sound of AI Fireside Chats. In this podcast series, I talk to leaders in music and audio tech, picking their brains on the impact that AI is having on the space. In this episode, I've interviewed Matt Pelling, co-founder and director of Loopmasters. Matt has a long experience working in the music industry. With his work at Loopmasters and now at Loopcloud, he has streamlined the creative process of hundreds of thousands of music producers, providing them with high-quality loops and samples. In our conversation, we talked about Matt's passion for music and music tech, the challenges of running a music tech startup company, and the impact that technology has had on music production over the last 15 years. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hi, Matt. How's it going?
Hey, Valerio. It's going well, thank you. Lovely to hear from you.
Great. It's great to have you here in the show. Right. So, let's just get started. So I usually ask my guests a little bit about their background. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about where you come from, business-wise, and obviously your music background and all of these kind of things.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm Matt Pelling. I live in Brighton. I'm running Loopmasters and Plugin Boutique. I started getting into the industry around about 96. I was a drummer, and I moved away from my band and my friends, pursuing a lady that I was with at the time, and right. Couldn't do my sort of drumming anymore. I decided to get into a little bit of music production and got a small computer, a Turtle Beach Trope sound card, and Cakewalk Express, and soon realised that I had a thirst for more sounds that I could mess around with, and started looking at the sample industry and the sample packs that were being released at the time by various companies like Zero G, Time and Space, eLab and Best Service, people like that. It sort of captured my imagination, and I sent an email. Or no, probably wasn't an email back then. It was probably a letter or something like that to Time and Space, who were then the UK's main distributor of sample packs and music software. And luckily enough, I got a response from Ed Stratton, the guy who ran Zero G and Time and Space. Said they were looking for someone to do some marketing. So, cut a long story short, I worked there for a couple of years and learned a lot about how this little cottage industry of the sample CD world existed and how it operated, and quite enjoyed what it was about. I'd always sort of had an interest in business, and I'd run a few little market stalls and things like that, so I kind of knew I wanted to get into some sort of business, and I love music. So this started to spark my inspiration a little bit, and after I left there after a couple of years, which I think were quite successful, I then started working on some sample packs with some music equipment that a friend had lent me, and met a couple of guys who were back from my hometown in Eastbourne near Brighton, and we started working on some content for sample packs. We started trying to make some music for library music and stuff like that, and we also formed a sort of a hybrid live drum and bass and trip hop band called Blue Book, which still exists in a very remote form compared to how it started. And I had a company then called Beatnik Samples. We released I think 4 or 5 sample CDs, which they were back then. And that went quite well, but I decided to go travelling, came back after a year, and in 2002 I started more seriously with Loopmasters, and that's how I kind of started with a guy called Paul Willard, who's still head of products at Loopmasters, and that's kind of the backstory to how Loopmasters first started.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds really good. And so how was it for you founding what basically at the time was a music startup company, right? Now, you've been very successful with Loopmasters throughout the years, but obviously you had to start a little bit from scratch. So how was that, and how I mean, was like these startup movements, like in a sense, the same like as today? So it's something that's like highly like recognized and quite frankly, like quite fashionable today. So how was that like back in the day?
I think it was quite different back then. There was, it was definitely more of a cottage industry. There was probably around about 30 or 40 companies in the world that were making either expansion packs for synths or sample CDs. And the difference was, I guess, apart from the size of the market, was the fact that you had to make a physical product. So we were making CD-ROMs, which had an audio CD and a data CD. People were still sampling into hardware samplers back then, and a lot of them would use an audio CD player to record into their Akai's or Emus or whatever they had. But then we were on the cusp of the change into more digital based WAV and AIFF products. So we actually manufactured CDs, and the real difference there was the cost. Nowadays the barriers to entry are minimal, I would say. If you've got some sounds and you can format them properly, you can in some ways get into the sample industry. But back then you literally had to put your money where your mouth was, and there was a bit more risk associated with it. If you made any mistakes and had to repress the CDs, you might wipe away all the profit that you would have made. So I think that instilled something of a great ethos of quality control, us, and that's something which we're sort of still proud to uphold now. And I think it's part of the sort of recipe for our success was the fact that we knew, certainly in the early days, one or two mistakes, either in quality or marketing, could have meant the end of Loopmasters pretty quickly, to be honest. So that's one side of it. I guess the flip side of it is that there was less competition compared to now. So there were advantages and disadvantages to getting things going, but we started off with a very small budget, and we just tried to make every release a success so that we could kind of double up each time. And before you knew it, we had sort of 30 or 40 products out there, and we sort of looked to get to the next stage, which was to build more of a website presence for ourselves independently of our distributors. And that's kind of where we get to around 2006, 2007, where we really decided to invest in probably the first digital distribution portal for sample packs online.
Okay, cool. And what kinds of challenges did you face, and do you still face, like producing like sample packs, like and these kind of things? Obviously, you mentioned like one is like ensuring the quality of the sound packs that you release is okay, is actually like great. So do you have like other like challenges? I mean, obviously, like you were like back then, like at the beginning, like of a business venture. I don't know like how much like business like insights like you had like back then, or like your business background. So how did you like manage like to just like put things together like and become like the successful company like that you've become like over time, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'd love to say it was all planned out strategically from day one, but as we all know, things don't tend to go that way in life. My background is, I mean, my mother and father were both essentially shopkeepers, and so I'd sort of been around small-time entrepreneurs, I guess, in them since I was little, and I wasn't very good at taking orders from people, so I kind of knew I really wanted to do a business, but I certainly didn't have I had a poor quality degree in accountancy and finance, so I had some background in knowing how to run the books of a company. But I think probably the bottom line was that I was reasonably stubborn and very proud of what I did, and I set quite a simple benchmark when I invited Paul to start working for me, and we literally said, look, let's give this a year, let's give it absolutely 100%, and let's have no regrets if it doesn't work out. And again, if you combine that with the sort of quality ethos that we had to have for the cash flow reasons, it was quite a simple way of looking at things, but Actually, if you follow those principles to the nth degree, then you can get quite far. And really, I suppose things started to just naturally increase from there, in that we got good reviews and we treated the musicians and producers well that we work with, which wasn't always the case and still isn't always the case with musicians and producers. Being musicians ourselves, we kind of understood some of the challenges that musicians have, and we wanted to ensure that we gave them a trustworthy and respectful experience when they worked with us that went both ways. And I think over time, that's really served us well. We still work with a lot of the producers that we started with many, many years ago. We decided that rather than try and make content ourselves, we'd be much better served if we tried to connect with a wider portfolio of producers who were just better at doing different things, whether it be playing the bass or making house or dubstep or drum and bass. We felt that if we tried to do everything ourselves, we might make a bit more money in the short term, but ultimately 10 years down the line, we'd have a catalogue that sounded very much the same, whereas what we have now is a really diverse portfolio of products that we're massively proud of, and we're hugely respectful and glad that we're working with the people that we do. So not sure if that quite answered your question, but it kind of...
Yeah, definitely.
So a bit of business acumen, I suppose, quite a lot of stubbornness, a dosage of pride, and respect for the people that we work with, I think, is probably the five common elements that have sort of pervade us to this point.
Cool. So lately you've been like very focused also like on the kind of like newer like application called Loopcloud. Can you tell me like a little bit more about this, and how's that like different like from Loopmasters? How like those two kinds of like different products like, or like different applications in a sense, like coexist, and what's like the kind of environment that you're, or ecosystem that you're trying like to create there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely an evolving situation with Loopcloud, something that we're really excited by. I feel like the scenario where we started was what I call the first generation of the sampling industry, which was the cottage industry that came out of the creation of the sampler, with very few companies using CD-ROMs and so forth. I think the second generation was probably 2008 to 2015, where we had sample packs being sold online, instant delivery, and lots of digital distribution happening. I think that the third chapter of the sampling industry is what we're a couple of years into now, and it's very interesting where it's going. We're looking to make things really user-friendly and immediate for producers. We're looking to cut down on the time that it takes from an idea to getting something happening within your music. We kind of see the creative flow, the creative journey, as being a very fragile thing, and it can be interrupted by many things, whether it's a phone call, someone telling you it's dinner time, or too much alcohol, or just getting too late at night. I think the hours that we spent making music are really precious, and the quicker that we can get from concept from our brain to our ears, essentially, is the better. And so Loopcloud is an idea that comes from that side of thinking, where we feel that people want to now, we've got this library of nearly 4 million sounds, and we're aware that when you go into any category of Loopmasters or any genre or instrument, you'll find such a huge amount of products there that we're starting to become guilty of actually delaying the process of creativity through too much choice. And the ability with Loopcloud to be able to search for anything that you want and actually be quite specific. You could say, I want a acoustic guitar pattern in a jazz genre in E minor, and soon there will be even more choices available. But even there, you can get a result within 5 seconds. You might get 100 results in 5 seconds. And you can actually sync that. Loopcloud syncs to your DAW, which means that your track can be playing and you can be auditioning sounds in time, in key with the music. And I think that puts the sounds very quickly into the context of your track. And hopefully that's doing the job of, that I was describing, of moving an idea that's in your mind into something that you're hearing, within a matter of a minute or less. Whereas before you would need to think which sample pack might work for that I already own, and have listen through all your, different sounds, pitch different sounds differently to test them in your music, download them, put them in your track. Or if you don't own the right sound, you'd have to think what sample pack might work from Loopmasters or whoever else you buy your sounds from, and buy that sample pack and then go through it. And you can quickly see how both of the second and third examples might take minutes up to hours. And we think that time period can just kill the vibe, and that's not what we're here for. We're here to keep the vibe going. We're here to create inspiration and provide you with the tools that you need to keep making music quickly when you're in the moment. So that's kind of the concept of Loopcloud. And once we started tagging and filtering and formatting all of the sounds that we've got and putting them into this amazing software, we had a load more ideas of how we actually could get even quicker from
right.
brain to ears, and this is where we're at now. We're at this sort of stage where we're refining this platform into something that's essentially even quicker to get where you want to go.
Cool. Okay, so obviously Loopcloud is a piece like a very advanced technology. So what I would like to ask you is, obviously you have also a long experience as a music producer yourself. So how has the creative process of the producer changed over the last 10, 15 years, and how technology is reshaping the creative workflow?
Yeah, well, it's been an amazing 15 years when it comes to the advancement of music software technology. Where we started back in 1990-ish, something like that, 92, 93, compared to now is worlds apart. Back then everything was more expensive, and of course you would have less equipment. The advantages of back then were that you tended to get to know your equipment much better, because everything seemed to cost about £1,000, and back then obviously we had no money, so you could probably only get one, or if you were lucky, two things a year to add to your studio. And the advantage of that would be that you would probably know those pieces of equipment quite well, and that's good. That's the advantage of that period, and perhaps the only advantage really. You would take longer to make music generally, whereas now what we've got with the advancement of virtual studio technology, plugins, and the software that absolute genius companies are coming out with these days, means that you can really do so many things. There's some great products like Melodyne for auto-correcting pitch, Synaptic plugins where you can take the drums out of a mix, and there's all these sorts of amazing audio analysis programs. Obviously there's great reverbs effects, and all of the great pianos like Rhodes and Hammonds have been multi-sampled, and they're more realistic than they've ever been. So if you couple that with things like Loopcloud and obviously Ableton and all the great DAWs and the fantastic features they have, all of the free YouTube tutorials that you can get, then there's so much on offer for the musician of today. And of course that also benefits people of my age as well that started making music in the 90s. But certainly if you're a teenager getting into it now, then the opportunities are just insane. Possibly the downside of it now, apart from the fact that there's so much noise in the music space and also the creative space, where it's very difficult to there's so many tracks coming out every week. It's very hard it's impossible, in fact, to keep track of them all. So there's a lot more competition, but probably one of the disadvantages would be that actually you can have so much equipment now for such a small amount of money, that you might not know your equipment very well. So that's one thing that I think is important to bear in mind is before you go out accumulating, 10 reverbs and 15 synths, maybe it's better to spend a bit of time actually learning each one. And if you don't like it, delete it and until you find the thing that you do like.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Again, I'm not sure if that's the right.
No. Yeah, definitely. So I was thinking just that, like musicians and composers, like for hundreds of years have played around with the idea of like constraints, right? So you were constrained by, I don't know, like certain like instrument, opportunities, like and possibilities that you had there. So I'm thinking, for example, like back then, like during like the, I don't know, like 17th, like 18th century when like you had issues with horns, which couldn't like hold like a tone, or certain tones like, regularly, like, or very stable. And so like composers had to somehow find like creative ways like around like these issues, and constraints by themselves were a very important part of the creative process itself. It seems like somehow that today, like, in like the creative like music workflow, like we have like way less constraints than we've ever had, like in our history, right? And this obviously like could be, as you said, like a super cool like thing like to have, but at the same time, I feel sometimes like you are like overwhelmed by all the different possibilities like that you have like out there. So that is also, I don't know, like a kind of like counter argument to have access to all of like these possibilities is that you may just like drown, because of all like of these things that you have like out there, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that is what we have to be careful of as musicians, is that sort of cost benefit ratio of where you spend your time. I think ultimately, we all want to be creating as much great music as possible each year, and if possible releasing it through some channel, and hopefully some people will listen to it, whether it's our friends or whether we manage to get stuff released commercially, or obviously whether we're a huge commercial success. Either way, I think what we're trying to do is come out with as much output that we're proud of, and there are lots of things on that journey that can compromise how much you'll end up making, which kind of goes back to the sort of comments about Loopcloud, etc. What we don't want to do as a company, in fact, Loopmasters and Plugin Boutique and Loopcloud, the last thing we want to do is waste your time or take up too much of your time in the research phase. We really feel that it is a fragile and sensitive process that needs to be respected, and you need to be aware of that with yourself. And we're all different. Some of us are very particular in our production, and others we're not so minute with our detailing of each element of the process. And depending on which end of the scale you are, probably will affect the type of music that you make and the quantity of it that you make. So it's definitely worth bearing in mind when you're on a creative journey or trying to create a career in music, that you should balance up your sort of production time with your learning and equipment time and technology time. You've got to have a balance if you want to actually get anything done. There's a lot of choice out there right now, and it's almost a bit bewildering. So you should have a firm goal. Like, for example, for me this year, I've just got back to the studio recording a lot of my old friends that I was in the first band that I was talking about, 25 years ago. My aim was, even though I'm not a great producer, but that luckily for me they're even worse, but they're musicians, was to create an EP of 10 tracks throughout the year with the very limited time that I have with them, popping round to visit from wherever they live, in the next county or whatever. And because I'm not so detailed with my production process, and because I'm not necessarily trying to learn a new synth or technique every time I create a new track, I've managed to get something done which, you know, probably only a handful of people will ever hear, but ultimately I'm relatively proud of it. And it's because I set a goal of getting something done in a certain time frame rather than having the other goal of making it the absolute best it could ever be, which could take me another 3 years. But I would rather personally make another album next year than spend 2 or 3 years on this one album. This is a hobby, by the way. It's not my main, not my main thing. But so that's just one way that you could think about it, I guess.
Yeah, but I think this also applies to like business purposes as well. Most of the time done, it's way better than perfect, right? So if you spend too much time like on something, then yeah, it could be actually like an issue, right? Because sometimes like you want something like even very quickly, not perfect, out there, so that you can perhaps even like iterate like on that thing, getting like some feedback, like and improve. And I guess like this works for startups, but in a sense could also work like for your music. Like if you hope to like touch like someone's feelings or just like be appreciated as a musician, you want also like to cater like your music like to the people who are out there, I guess. And
sure, you could definitely apply it to business as well. You know, there are things that we're looking into with Loopcloud technologies that seem to have a lot of amazing possibilities. So I don't know if we want to get into the AI sort of stuff yet, but it's a good example where there's amazing possibilities of what we could do. But actually we could start working with something now that shows some sort of proof of concept that we would then give us the gravitas to move forward with in more detail later. But we can all brainstorm these great ideas, but when you look into the details, you realize that to get where you really want to go, it's 3 years work. And so what do? Do you do nothing publicly for 3 years and come out with the absolute barnstormer of a idea and concept? Or do you get something out now? And the benefit of doing something now is that you can get feedback, you can start working with companies that are doing really interesting things. You can get feedback from the customers, and actually your competition doesn't have 3 years to do something better because you've got something out already. So in business terms, it kind of applies as well, a bit like the music thing. You could go for the absolute, 100% finished idea, or you can say, well, this is good enough for now. So let's get some feedback. Let's put it out, and then let's see where we go for the next step.
Yeah, I think like that's terrible advice to all of our listeners. Like we're also, terrific advice, I should say, not terrible, sorry. But I mean, it's great advice, like, cause, it's, at the end of the day, like what, like the lean startup like method is all about, right? So just like iterate fast, try out things, don't wait for having like perfection, but just like try out things and get feedback in. And so you were also mentioning a little bit like artificial intelligence, and obviously, as you know, like here at Melodrive, we do like a lot of like AI stuff like ourselves, and we are focused on AI audio, AI music. So I would be really interested in knowing like what you think the role of AI is going to be in music production, like if any at all, because we've spoken so much like about how technology has changed like things around like over the last 15 years, but now we have this new kind of like tool, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and it's slowly getting like into a number of different market verticals. So probably this is going to affect music, is already affecting music and audio to a certain extent. But I'd be super curious to know what you think about like AI and music production.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's something that's definitely been on my radar for a few years. And obviously more so these days working with you guys at Melodrive has, massively increased my appetite for it. But I've also come into contact with it in other various ways, through my job over the last couple of years. And, I think my overall opinion when it comes to music production, because I need to be clear on that, because when it comes to listening to music, I think generative music is really interesting, and obviously people like Brian Eno and people like that pioneered that type of thinking a while back, and I think that it's a really, really interesting area. But if I was just to talk about music production, which is obviously more my space, then my overriding view on it at this point in time really is that I think that it can be a massively useful thing, tool that can be harnessed again to speed up the workflow of a producer. But what I'm slightly nervous about with AI is that I don't want it to replace the human when it comes to being a musician or a music producer. So what do I mean by that? I guess what I'm trying to say is that if AI can speed up the music maker's process and be guided by the musician to help get him or her to their end goal sooner, a bit like the theme that I've been probably talking about since the start of the interview. I think that is a wonderful thing. What I slightly worry about, slightly War of the World style thing is that, AI could become too intelligent, and therefore musicians have already got a hard time making money. As far as I'm concerned, they're as skilled or more skilled than any lawyer or accountant, but they don't get rewarded unless they're very lucky or they're just amazing, to the same degree as an accountant or lawyer, once they've got their qualifications, are probably arguably guaranteed to get a certain amount of money. So what I wouldn't want is for AI to replace the job of the musician, because the musician has it hard already, and I really feel that the feelings of a human need to be voiced through music, and a human is the only one that can really feel those feelings at this point in time. Now, if this is played back in 20 years' time, who knows? That might sound like a silly thing to say, but today that seems like a realistic thing to say. There are certain companies out there that are already making sample packs using AI, and it's something which we've currently steered away from, because as a company, we pay the mortgages indirectly of a lot of music producers out there, and we help them to stay afloat, and they help us to stay afloat, and it's a nice scenario that works, and I wouldn't want to make a few more percentage or points on a deal, or a bit more profit each year, knowing that I'd sort of put 300 or 400 people out of work. Yet, on the flip side, when it comes to Loopcloud, we're working closely with Melodrive right now, and we're looking at some really cool ways to massively enhance the production flow. And the AI side of things can learn, for example, how to index a file and give it properties which can then be searched on by the user to find exactly the sort of sound that they're looking for. Now, in that context, it's, to my mind, an amazing tool that can speed up the workflow and give amazing results that just wouldn't be viable via human, basically. So in that context, AI is the perfect tool for the future of music. And in a generative sense, it's also, of course, amazing. My only caveat is that obviously, like I've said, I want to make sure that musicians are heard as musicians and not replaced, so that's where I'm at with AI right now. But when it comes to Loopcloud, and also obviously through Plugin Boutique, we work with various companies who are making really interesting AI powered tools, and, some of the possibilities of what they can do connect perfectly with the imagination of what humans want to be able to do. So where you've got that perfect match between the human and the AI, you've got the future of music.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a very good point. And I think that there's a lot of misconception into AI music and generative music specifically, because I've talked to a number of like composers and music producers. Like many of them are very open to the idea to collaborate with an artificial intelligence to co-create music, like if you will, right? But there's also this fear that like the machines are coming and they'll take over our jobs, right? And this is somehow scary, like for a musician. But I believe, given AI music and generative music specifically is entering like a very creative endeavor, which is that of music making. I think like here is a little bit different from, I don't know, like people who like drive trucks, for example. Like there, like you have like I don't know, like it's a specific job where there's I don't think you can say there's a lot of like creativity like involved in that. Like it's kind of like a manual like job, and there obviously AI probably is going to kind of like take over those jobs. But in music is kind of like very different, I would say, because it's a little bit like chess. Now we have like AI chess players that are way, way better than like the best human chess players, but still we do play chess because we play chess for our own enjoyment. So the fact that like AI now like is better than us at playing chess doesn't mean that we are not going to play chess like anymore. And I believe like music in a sense like is very similar to this. So the fact is that we are always going to need to express ourselves through music, and AI is not going to change like this very fundamental human feeling or a human instinct, I would say. So in that sense, I believe like that generative AI systems can coexist along with human musicians, and probably there's going to be some kind of like cross-fertilization between like these two aspects, like the machine-oriented generation and the human composition. And these two things can come up, they can mix and they can come up like with very interesting new musical artifacts in a sense that probably could be completely new in a sense, because we could explore things that only humans haven't explored so far.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I've always been interested in the hybrid between electronic and real music.
right.
So I always used to be into, bands like Portishead and, Massive Attack and,
right.
Ronnie Size, people like that, where they would fuse real instrumentation with programmed instrumentation. So I suppose taking it one stage further, you could have a band that's got an AI guitarist, let's say, but the rest of the band is human, or that's just how I was imagining it. But there's definitely all sorts of ways of hybrid is my word of the year, really. I mean, my car is a hybrid, my musical taste is hybrid. I like that cross section between technology and analog realism, if you like. So there's definitely a place for it there, and I would be interested to know more about which artists are exploring that the most deeply. I did have a question for you. What is the difference between generative and AI generated music? Because you seem to be separating the two, but I'm not actually aware what the difference is.
Well, I think it's just a matter of terminology, really. So, and like in academia, like and in research, you can refer like to AI music or AI generated music or generative music or algorithmic music, and I would say more or less these are all like synonyms, I would say, right? And for example, the term generative music was introduced by Brian Eno. So it's really more or less like the same thing, like I would say, but not all of it, all AI music is generative music, because as you mentioned yourself, there's a lot of like AI applications in music that are not orientated towards actual generation. And you could have like mood classifiers, you could have genre classifiers, for example. So you use artificial intelligence for extracting knowledge directly from a score. It could be a symbolic score, like a MIDI score, or directly from audio even. And so in a sense, AI music is a larger category like than AI generated music. And in AI music, you have like AI music generation, you have like AI music analysis. So it's very like, it's kind of like umbrella category. But then when you talk about like the specific terms that define like generative music, so like algorithmic composition or like even procedural generation, more or less I would say like they are like different people use them like interchangeably, I would say. But then obviously, you have like people in academia who are like very, very picky, and they would say, in procedural generation, you don't necessarily need like an AI powered like application. You can use like simple rules like to generate music, and but I would say more or less like they are all the same.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, definitely clearer now. So, for sure, there is a similarity between the two, but generative music is literally music that is generated by computer.
Yes,
AI can be a part or all of that, but it can also be many other things that can be a component part of music production process or a music production tool or software.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also like this very interesting thing, which is like that we mentioned already, like this hybrid generation. So you have like a hybrid generative system where you have a system that works in collaboration with a human composer, right? So for example, Google launched some of this like technology. It's called Magenta, right? And so if you are a producer, you can use like these Magenta plugins, I think directly in Ableton, right? So you can integrate those there, and you can play around with them, and you can, I think like they have like an AI like co-creation like for like drum patterns, for example. So you can create like your own drum patterns and then feed these patterns to Magenta, and then you get like continuation like of those patterns, and then you can tweak the results. Like it's very, very interesting, and like in my opinion is where like AI generation should go towards, really. So this kind of like collaboration, just like to explore things that are like outside of our, I would say, human music bubble, right? And see like if there's like something else like to explore, and perhaps machines can explore the music space and lead like human composers to discover new musical places or like musical landscapes that we are not aware of like today, right?
Well, that would be very exciting, wouldn't it? So the robots take us to a place that inspires our human side into new degrees and becomes an inspirator in its own way, rather than replacing jobs, which is the fear factor. You look at what's the opportunity, and the opportunity is we go to places. I'm kind of imagining Daft Punk type vocals and guitars taken to the extreme to some new dimension. And actually, we realize that there's great inspiration to be had from these formulas and training models that have got to the next level, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that this is like super exciting stuff, and unfortunately it's not something that you'll see on the market right now, even with generative music companies like, obviously Melodrive, but also like other companies, like Amper Music is more, we have like this very interesting like generative technology, but still like this combination or like this hybrid level where you have like the human collaborating with the AI is still like overlooked. Obviously there are reasons for that, and the main reason being like that this technology is like very, very difficult to build, and it's going to take time, and it's like a process, right? So you start with something like more simple, as you said, like as we were like mentioning before, like with the lean startup method, like start with something like that works, not something that's perfect, and then you iterate over there. But I believe like that AI music generation is gonna really resonate, and it's with the market when it'll be mature enough to be like a co-creation tool. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. But yeah,
That's cool.
Yep.
Do you mind if I explain to the listeners a little bit roughly how we're working with you guys and how Loopcloud might be adopting some AI in the near future?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I was going to ask you that. Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, yeah, exactly. So just to put things in context for those that don't know Loopcloud, obviously it's a software tool that connects to the cloud, and you can use it locally. You can add your own sample library to it, all your folders of samples and sounds. And you will also have anything that you've ever bought at Loopmasters, and on top of that, there's a subscription platform where you can download single sounds and browse via different search mechanisms to find exactly the sort of thing you want and check it out in time with your music as it syncs to your DAW of choice. So that's basically Loopcloud. So the way we're working with AI is that we envisage a couple of issues for the user. So you might currently have this huge 100 gigabyte sound library that you've been collecting for the last 20 years of all manner of things bought and recorded and who knows what. And you may or may not have tagged or labeled these sounds very well. So you might have them in lots of different folders and they might be a bit of a mess. We like to think that if those sounds were tagged properly, that actually with the Loopcloud software, you would have an amazing experience where, if every sound was tagged with the instrument, the genre perhaps, the BPM and the key, and whether it's a loop or a one shot, even if you had those 6 bits of information for every sound, you would be amazingly surprised what you could find in your own sound library. Let alone, of course, Loopmasters sound library, but I won't harp on about the commercial aspect of that. Yeah. But just for your own sound library, it would be infinitely rewarding. You would find lots of things when you can actually select the key of the track you're working in. And as long as we know what the key of the sound is, the sample, it will actually automatically pitch it to the key of your choice. So suddenly you'll find all of these sounds from the past that work perfectly with the track that you're working on today. And we think that that's of massive value. One of the issues, though, is that your sample library probably isn't tagged that well. And so we've been working with Melodrive to actually create a hybrid solution that combines looking at file names and folders and combines that with our AI tool that will actually effectively listen to your sound, and it will tell you and us what it is, and it will tag it within Loopcloud, so it will know if it's a bass or a trumpet or a kick drum or a triangle or a harmonica. And when you combine that with the technology of Loopcloud, where it is today, let alone where it will be tomorrow, we really believe in that as a massively useful tool. So that's one way that we're going to be working with AI moving forward. And another is that we're just talking to a company in Switzerland who have got some technology which will also listen to your track or your sound, whatever you decide to have it listen to, and will come up with suggestions of sounds which will work with your track or your sound. So if there's a chord progression or a certain rhythm, it will provide solutions that you could again select, whether it's from the commercial Loopmasters massive library, or if you just wanted to limit it to your own sounds even, it would come up with suggestions of solutions that would help you to be inspired and move your track forward. So yeah, in a nutshell, there's 2 ways that we're currently looking at AI directly for Loopcloud, and we think that both of these things will tick the box of helping the musician without replacing the musician. And so they're 2 good examples of hopefully what people will see in Loopcloud coming up summer 2020.
Cool. Yeah, super exciting. And yeah, so this is really something we are looking forward to, because using artificial intelligence for helping people fueling create music creativity in this way is Yeah, really, really exciting. And as I mentioned before, like it's also like what we have in mind, like at MeloDrive. So this idea of like combination between like an AI, like and a human music creator, like working together, like to arrive like at something, interesting there. So, but just like reflecting upon like these two things, like you mentioned here, Matt. So, how do you think the workflow of a music producer is going to change once we're going to have like all of this very interesting like AI applications and more? So how do you see like that change, this like changing with the help of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, when it comes to music production, again, not music consumption, I'll focus on music production, but I see it solving a lot of problems with existing audio, whether it be classifying it, organizing it, processing it, and suggesting it, at the relevant times, all being really relevant to the production process. Therefore, what it's doing is it's inspiring you and it's helping you to get somewhere. And you're getting there quicker, and you're staying inspired, and you're staying in the moment. And I think the happy medium is that exactly. It's that harping back to that sort of, either you've got an idea and it gets you there much quicker, or you haven't got an idea and it inspires you to have an idea. Okay, so either way, not left sitting there scratching your head, or, smashing the wall with something because you've just spent 3 hours trying to find something to fit with this guitar riff that you've just been playing for the last 3 hours that you think's amazing, but nothing seems to fit with it. And you're not inspired enough to make the right thing to go with it, or it's not your field of expertise. Every producer's, one of the things these days is people get criticized for using samples and patches and so forth, but, you've got to put into perspective that the modern music producer is expected to be an engineer, a producer, a drummer, a bass player, a keyboardist, a vocalist. All these things are to be expected from the modern multi-instrumentalist, and that just might not be your thing. You might be an amazing drummer and bass player that's not bad at production and arrangement, or any one of those things could be missing. And I think things like sampling, but in an intelligent way, and AI, both of those things can fill the gap that keeps the process moving forward. And you end up being proud and feeling like you are taking ownership of the production because you've spent hours on it, but you've actually got somewhere at the end. And I think AI is the thing that will fill in the gaps that you might have, and it will also provide inspiration in areas that you're less inspired, and it will also save time. These are the three things that for me make it invaluable in the future music production marketplace and in the world.
That's cool. And I think one thing that kind of like derives from like your reasoning there is like this problem of authenticity, right? Because I spoke with many music producers who use like loops and samples, and sometimes like you hear like this feedback that's, I'm not gonna use like loops because like I don't know, like I don't feel like this is like my work, like I don't feel I own like this music, like in a sense, or at least I should change, like modify and these loops to my liking so that they reflect who I am and what I want to express, like in a very like precise manner. Obviously, like this applies like to loops, even to samples, like in one shots, like to a certain extent, right? But if you have all of a sudden like almost like a sparring partner, like an AI system that stays there, even if this system doesn't actually create music for you, but it still suggests you things. And it says, well, you've played around like with these loops. This is the type of like track and genre you are using. So probably you should take a look at these other loops, because like these drum loops go very well with that bass loop that you had there. Do you think like there may be like an issue of authenticity here? And I mean, obviously not just like with the AI aspect of it, but also like with loops, like and samples, like more in general.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a really good question. If you look at any post by any sample company on Facebook or social media, you'll find a ream of I could call them trolls. You could just call them people that have got strong opinions, responding to they always seem to be motivated to respond to an advert from any sort of company that's supplying tools or sounds or patches. And obviously, you can imagine that I've got a reasonably strong opinion on that side of things.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, in my slightly older, wiser years these days, hopefully, my outlook on it is really that, these people have got strong opinions, so you've got to kind of respect them. So ultimately, these people probably shouldn't use any sort of sounds, and they're much more, probably they have a modular synth system or something, and they take a lot of pleasure in making from scratch every sound that they use in their music, and I've got a lot of respect for that. I mean, they should probably be making sample packs, to be honest, because they might make some money, because they're probably not finishing many tracks. Let's face it.
Right.
But there are so many different types of musicians out there, and to try and sort of put us all into one basket is the wrong thing to do.
Right.
Everyone has the opportunity to use samples in different ways. And, one extreme would be the type of person that I think these people are criticizing. And certainly this type of person is not the type of music producer we've ever particularly even wanted as a customer. And that would be the type of musician who literally would buy, let's say, a construction kit sample pack product where you get essentially mini tracks broken down into elements, who reassembles one of those construction kits or maybe blends two of them together, maybe gets a vocalist or maybe doesn't to record something over the top and calls that his track. Now that has never been, the construction kit side of things has never been something that Loopmasters has ever been big on, in any way. But it is an extreme example that does have some merit in you saying, well, is that person a musician? But I'd argue that person is probably at the start of their musical journey, and even assembling a few loops together and maybe messing around with the mixer, although the rest of us might not give that person a lot of credit. Everyone has to start somewhere, right? And so for that character, he or she is enjoying the process of messing around with stems effectively. And, some people could argue that's not too far off of what you could say some modern DJs are doing. It depends again how you look at the DJing process. But then there's all types of people. There could be someone who uses samples to make backing tracks for him to jam his drums, bass or guitars to for practice. One shots are essentially single sounds, and they can be used in so many different ways. You can layer them, you can process them, you can program them. And I would argue that anyone using one shots would be difficult to criticize them for not adding some creativity and not being musicians. So then we've got the middle ground finally, which is loops. So loops are an interesting one because they can be very inspirational. They can be the starting point for a rhythm for your track. They can be a melodic or harmonic element that inspires you to compose around them. They may end up being the centerpiece of your track, or you may end up losing those sounds at the end of the process, even though they've inspired the start of a process. There's so many ways of using samples and loops that I think we can't put everybody into one basket. And so I just think some of the strong opinions against samples and loops are probably coming from people who aren't or are making certain assumptions about the end user, probably without knowing them, and certainly without knowing what sort of music they're making. So sampling's been part of music since the sampler was invented. It's been sampling has been a major force in modern music, and it also samples older music to bring music back in new and interesting and exciting ways. And it also bridges the gap that some people have with their own musicality, and it also inspires. So I think for all of those positive reasons, it's definitely got a place in music, and it's a big part of it.
That's great. Okay, Matt. So yeah, thank you very much for this fascinating conversation. So I hope you have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much for having me. I hope it's been interesting.
Fantastic. Bye-bye, Matt. Cheers.
Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
And this was my conversation with Matt Pelling. The Sound of AI Fireside Chat is published every month and produced by Melodrive. If you want to know more about AI music, you can visit our website at melodrive.com and take a look at the Knowledge Center section. Until next time.